The first snowflake fell just as Ethan Blackwood finished securing the barn doors. It landed on his weathered knuckle, a perfect crystalline star that dissolved into nothing. Fitting, he thought, everything beautiful was temporary. By morning, the forecast promised a blizzard that would blanket Shadow Creek in white silence. He welcomed it. Ethan stood motionless, watching more flakes descend from the darkening sky. At 35, the lines around his eyes spoke of someone much older, someone who had lived several lifetimes of grief in just 4 years. The cold didn't bother him anymore. Not since the fire. "Senor Ethan," Miguel's voice carried from the ranch house porch. "Storm coming fast. You should come inside." Ethan nodded without turning. Miguel Cortez had been with Shadow Creek for nearly 20 years, first working for Ethan's father, then staying on when Ethan inherited the ranch. Now at 60, Miguel was the only person who hadn't abandoned Ethan after Rebecca died, the only one who didn't whisper murderer when Ethan walked through town. "I'll check the north fence first," Ethan called back. "Don't wait up." "Always so stubborn," Miguel muttered, just loud enough to hear. "Like the mountains, both of you." Ethan knew Miguel meant Rebecca too. She had been stubborn, gloriously so. Where Ethan was quiet determination, Rebecca had been brilliant fire. Ironic considering how she died. The cold was intensifying as Ethan saddled Midnight, his black gelding. The horse snorted clouds of steam, sensing the approaching storm. They set out across the snow-dusted pastures toward the northern boundary of Shadow Creek. Most of the ranch had fallen into disrepair since Rebecca's death. Ethan maintained only what was necessary to keep the cattle alive and the bank at bay. What was the point of more? The 20-acre property had once been the jewel of the valley. Now it was known in hushed tones as that cursed Blackwood place, the place where Rebecca had burned. Midnight nickered nervously as they approached the pine forest marking Shadow Creek's northern edge. The wind was picking up, driving icy particles against Ethan's face. He pulled his scarf higher, squinting against the darkening landscape. That's when he saw it, a flash of white against the tree line that didn't belong. "Easy," he murmured to Midnight, guiding the horse closer. The snow was falling thicker now, but something about that unnatural whiteness drew him forward. As they approached, the shape resolved into something impossible. A woman in a torn wedding dress lay crumpled at the base of a large pine. For a moment, Ethan thought he was hallucinating. It wouldn't be the first time grief had conjured visions, particularly during storms. But when Midnight snorted and shied away, Ethan knew this was real. He dismounted, approaching cautiously. The woman's dark hair spilled across the snow, partially concealing her face. Her wedding gown, once elaborate with lace and beading, was torn and singed in places. One sleeve was burned away entirely, revealing angry red skin beneath. Most disturbing was the small revolver clutched in her right hand. Ethan knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers against her neck. A pulse fluttered, weak but present. He gently pried the gun from her grip, tucking it into his belt, before gathering her into his arms. She was lighter than expected, her body radiating unnatural heat despite the freezing temperature. As he lifted her, her head lolled against his shoulder, and he caught a glimpse of her face. Young mid-20s perhaps, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw even in unconsciousness. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, though Ethan was certain he'd never met her. He rarely left Shadow Creek these days, and strangers seldom visited, especially not brides with gunshot residue on their hands and burn marks on their skin. Midnight protested the additional weight, but allowed Ethan to mount with the unconscious woman cradled before him. By now, snow was falling in earnest, quickly covering their tracks. If someone was pursuing this woman, the storm would buy them time. "Let's get home, boy," Ethan murmured, turning the horse toward Shadow Creek. Miguel was waiting on the porch, lantern in hand, when Ethan emerged from the swirling white darkness. The older man's weathered face registered shock as he saw the bundle in Ethan's arms. "Mother of God," he whispered, rushing forward. "What happened? Who is she?" "Found her by the North Woods," Ethan replied, carefully dismounting while supporting the woman. "Get Doc Sullivan?" Miguel shook his head. "Road's already closing, senor. Storm's here early." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we do what we can. Prepare the guest room." The guest room hadn't been used since Rebecca died. Like much of the house, it had been closed off, preserved in a moment of time that Ethan couldn't move beyond. Now necessity forced him to confront another piece of his past. As Miguel hurried ahead to prepare the room, Ethan carried the unconscious woman through Shadow Creek's main house. The building was large, too large for one person, with high ceilings and wooden beams that had once made it feel warm and inviting. Now it echoed with emptiness. The woman stirred slightly in his arms, a soft moan escaping her lips. Ethan quickened his pace. The guest room was dusty despite Miguel's hasty efforts, but the sheets were clean and the fireplace already crackling with fresh kindling. Ethan gently laid the woman on the bed while Miguel hovered anxiously. "We need to get her out of these wet clothes," Ethan said pragmatically. "She has burns that need treatment." Miguel nodded, backing toward the door. "I will find something suitable. And the medical supplies." Left alone with the unconscious bride, Ethan carefully removed her ruined shoes and the outer layer of her sodden dress. The burns on her arm were concerning, but not life-threatening. More troubling was the bruising around her wrists and a deep gash above her right temple that had matted her dark hair with blood. Someone had hurt her. Recently. A chill that had nothing to do with the storm crept up Ethan's spine. The gun he'd taken from her felt heavier in his belt. Miguel returned with an armful of clothing and Rebecca's old medical kit. Neither man spoke as they worked together to tend the woman's wounds, clean the dirt from her face, and dress her in a simple flannel nightgown that had once belonged to Rebecca. When they finished, Ethan stood back studying their patient. Cleaned up, she was strikingly beautiful, not in the delicate way Rebecca had been, but with a strength evident even in repose. Her hands were not those of a society woman. There were calluses and small scars that spoke of someone who worked hard. "Who do you think she is?" Miguel asked softly. Ethan shook his head. "Someone in trouble." "The gun. We'll ask when she wakes." Ethan moved toward the door. "Stay with her. I'll check on the animals." Outside, the storm had intensified into a howling fury. Ethan fought his way to the barn, where Midnight and the other livestock huddled in relative warmth. As he ensured they had enough feed to last through the blizzard, his mind kept returning to the woman in the guest room. Why had she seemed familiar? Where had she come from? And most importantly, what had happened to her? The answers would have to wait. For now, Shadow Creek was cut off from the world, sealed in by ice and snow, and ancient secrets that refused to stay buried. Clara Harrington dreamed of fire. Fire consuming a house. Fire racing through a field of dry wheat. Fire reflected in a man's cold eyes as he raised a hand to strike her. She awoke with a strangled cry, bolting upright in an unfamiliar bed. Pain immediately lanced through her skull, and she pressed a hand to her head, feeling bandages where only agony had been before. "Easy," a deep voice cautioned from the shadows. "You've been unconscious for almost 2 days." Clara's eyes darted to the source. A man sat in a chair near the fireplace, his features half illuminated by the dying embers. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. His face was all angles and weathered planes, as if carved from the same wood as the mountains visible through the frosted window. "Where am I?" Her voice emerged as a rasp. "Who are you?" "Shadow Creek Ranch." The man leaned forward, passing her a glass of water. "I'm Ethan Blackwood. Found you half frozen by my north property line." Clara accepted the water with shaking hands, memories flickering like damaged film. White dress, running, a gun, fire. "The storm?" she asked, glancing toward the window. "Still going, 3 feet of snow so far. We're cut off for at least a week." He studied her with unsettling intensity. "Who are you running from?" Clara's hand instinctively went to her side, searching for something that wasn't there. "Looking for this." Ethan reached behind him and produced a small revolver. "Wasn't sure if you'd want it back, considering." "Considering what?" Clara's heart raced. "Considering you had powder burns on your hand when I found you." His eyes never left her face. "Did you shoot someone before you ran into my woods, Miss Harrington? Clara Harrington." She swallowed hard. "And I can't remember." It wasn't entirely a lie. Her memories were fragmented, sharp, painful shards that made no cohesive picture. She remembered the wedding dress, remembered running, remembered the biting cold. But what came before was a blur of terror and fire. Ethan's expression remained impassive, but something in his posture eased slightly. "Memory loss isn't uncommon with head injuries. Doc Sullivan can check you over properly once the road's clear." Clara nodded, then regretted it as pain throbbed behind her eyes. "Thank you for helping me." "Don't thank me yet," he replied cryptically, rising to his feet. His height was imposing in the small room. "Rest. Miguel will bring you something to eat soon." He moved toward the door with surprising grace for such a large man. "Mr. Blackwood," Clara called after him. "The gun." He paused, one hand on the doorknob. "I'll keep it safe until we know whether you need protecting or whether others need protecting from you." With that unsettling comment, he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara sank back against the pillows, trying to organize her fractured thoughts. The room was simply furnished but comfortable with faded floral wallpaper and heavy wooden furniture. A quilt covered her that seemed handmade intricate patterns, speaking of hours of patient work. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault wind, howling around the eaves of the house. Clara shivered despite the fire's warmth. Something about this place, about Ethan Blackwood, pulled at the edges of her memory. She was certain she'd never met him before, yet there was a resonance as if she'd been meant to find Shadow Creek. The burns on her arm throbbed, and with the pain came a flash of memory, a man's face contorted with rage lunging toward her. A wedding altar ablaze, screaming guests, the acrid smell of smoke and gunpowder. Had she shot someone? Had she started that fire? The door opened again, revealing an older Mexican man carrying a tray. His weathered face creased into kind lines when he saw she was awake. "Ah, bueno, you are with us again." He set the tray on the bedside table. "I am Miguel. You gave us quite a scare, señorita." "Clara," she supplied. "Clara Harrington." "Señorita Clara." He nodded, helping her sit up against the pillows. "Simple broth for now. Your stomach needs gentle treatment after such ordeal." As Clara sipped the rich broth, she studied Miguel. Unlike his employer, the older man's expression was open, his eyes warm with genuine concern. "Has Mr. Blackwood always been so—" She searched for the right word. "Suspicious," Miguel supplied with a small smile. "No, once he was different. Before the fire." "Fire." The word sent another jolt of fragmented memory through Clara. Miguel's expression clouded. "It is not my story to tell, but Shadow Creek has seen its share of tragedy." He gestured to her injured arm. "As perhaps you have too." "Yes," Clara nodded slowly. "I can't remember clearly. Just pieces. Running, being afraid." "The mind protects itself." Miguel patted her hand gently. "Rest now, memory will return when it is ready." After he left, Clara finished her broth and explored the room on unsteady legs. Her torn wedding dress had been draped over a chair, partially cleaned of dirt and snow. She examined it, fingers tracing the elaborate beadwork and singed lace. In the pocket, she found a single folded piece of paper. The handwriting was elegant but hurried. "I know what you did. They will too." Clara's hands trembled as she refolded the note. Whose handwriting was this? What had she supposedly done? She moved to the window, wiping condensation from the glass to gaze out at the storm-lashed landscape. Shadow Creek stretched before her, blanketed in white. In the distance, mountains rose like sentinels, dark against the swirling snow. Somewhere out there were answers. Somewhere was the truth about who Clara Harrington really was, and what she had done to end up half dead in a wedding dress at the edge of Ethan Blackwood's property. The question was whether she would welcome those answers when they finally came. 3 days into the blizzard, cabin fever set in. Clara had progressed from bedridden to restless, exploring the parts of the house Ethan hadn't explicitly forbidden. Most doors remained closed, silent sentinels guarding memories he clearly wasn't ready to share. The kitchen became neutral territory. Miguel had warmed to Clara's presence, teaching her where things were kept and allowing her to help prepare meals. Ethan remained distant, spending most daylight hours battling the elements to care for the livestock. On the fourth morning, Clara was alone in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread, when she heard the front door bang open. A gust of frigid air preceded Ethan's entrance. He stomped snow from his boots, unwinding his scarf to reveal chapped lips and reddened cheeks. "Storm's breaking," he announced, eyeing the dough on the counter. "Roads should be clear by tomorrow." Clara's hand stilled. "You're eager to be rid of me." It wasn't a question. Ethan's discomfort with her presence was palpable, though he'd been unfailingly polite. "You need a doctor," he replied simply. "And I'm sure there are people looking for you, Hanum." The thought sent a chill through Clara that had nothing to do with the draft from the open door. "I'm not so certain that would be a good thing." Ethan studied her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed, pulling off his gloves to warm his hands by the stove. "I need to check the south pasture fence," he said. "If you're feeling up to it, I could use an extra pair of hands." Clara blinked in surprise. It was the first time he'd invited her participation in anything. "I'd like that," she said quickly, covering the dough with a cloth. "I'll change." 20 minutes later, bundled in borrowed clothes that had once belonged to Rebecca Blackwood, Clara followed Ethan to the barn. He worked in efficient silence, saddling 2 horses, his black gelding, and a dappled mare with gentle eyes. "This is Willow," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She's steady, won't give you any trouble." Clara approached the horse, stroking her velvety nose. "She's beautiful." She was Rebecca's. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Clara waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say, but Ethan merely handed her the reins and moved to mount his own horse. They rode out into the blinding whiteness of Shadow Creek. The storm had indeed passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Snow draped every fence and tree, softening the harsh angles of the world. The sky overhead was a crystal blue that hurt to look at directly. Clara inhaled deeply, savoring the sharp, clean scent of winter. For the first time since waking at Shadow Creek, she felt something close to peace. "You ride well," Ethan observed as they navigated a narrow path between snowdrifts. "Muscle memory, I suppose." Clara smiled wryly. "Seems my body remembers things my mind doesn't." Ethan nodded. "Happens that way sometimes." They rode in companionable silence until reaching the southern boundary of Shadow Creek. Here, a stretch of fence had partially collapsed under the weight of snow. Ethan dismounted, gesturing for Clara to do the same. "Hold the post steady while I secure the wire," he instructed, pulling tools from his saddlebag. They worked together for nearly an hour, Clara holding weathered fence posts while Ethan repaired the damage. The physical labor felt good, real, grounding her in the present when memories of the past remained so elusive. "You're stronger than you look," Ethan commented as they finished the repairs. "So are you," Clara replied, then added boldly, "in more ways than one." His eyes met hers, something flickering in their depths. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually smile. Instead, he turned away, securing his tools. "There's something I need to show you," he said abruptly. "Follow me." They rode another half-mile along the property line until reaching a small rise. Ethan reined in his horse, gesturing toward the neighboring land that stretched to the horizon. "Thornhill Estate," he said, voice hardening. "Largest ranch in the county. Owner's a man named Jackson Thornhill." Clara felt a jolt at the name, though she couldn't place why. "You think I came from there?" she asked. "I think it's possible." Ethan fixed her with that penetrating stare. "Thornhill's getting married this month. Or was supposed to." Clara's hand instinctively went to her injured arm where the burn was slowly healing. "You think I'm his bride?" "I think you were running from something, and Thornhill's the type of man women run from." The bitterness in his tone suggested personal history. Before Clara could question him further, he turned his horse back toward Shadow Creek. "There's a feud between your families," she guessed, urging Willow to catch up. "There was," Ethan corrected. "Until Rebecca died. Now there's just Thornhill's ambition and my—" He trailed off. "Your what?" "My endurance," he finished quietly. The ride back to the ranch was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the barn, Clara noticed a curl of smoke rising from beyond the tree line in the direction they'd just come from. "Is that normal?" she asked, pointing. Ethan followed her gaze, his body immediately tensing. "No." Without another word, he spurred Midnight toward the house. Clara followed, heart pounding. Miguel was waiting on the porch, rifle in hand, his expression grim. "Riders coming?" he called as they approached. "From town." "How many?" Ethan asked, dismounting in one fluid motion. "3, Sheriff Bennett and 2 others. Ethan turned to Clara, his expression grave. "Time to find out who you are, Miss Harrington." Clara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. Somehow she knew that whatever the sheriff brought with him would shatter the fragile peace she'd found at Shadow Creek. They waited in tense silence as the riders approached along the snow-covered drive. Clara stood slightly behind Ethan, painfully aware of her borrowed clothes and the bandage still visible at her temple. Sheriff Bennett was a burly man, with a salt and pepper mustache and hard eyes. He dismounted, regarding Ethan with barely concealed dislike. "Blackwood," he acknowledged curtly before his gaze shifted to Clara. Recognition flashed across his features. "Well, I'll be damned." "So the rumors are true." "What rumors?" Ethan asked, stepping slightly in front of Clara. "That you're harboring Jackson Thornhill's runaway bride." Bennett's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "The same bride who shot him before burning down half his house on their wedding night." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Flashes of memory assaulted her, a gunshot flames licking up elegant curtains, a man's outraged face. That true Miss Harrington, Ethan's voice seemed to come from very far away. Clara opened her mouth to deny it, to say there must be some mistake, but no words came. Because buried beneath the fear and confusion was a terrible certainty that Sheriff Bennett was right. Jackson Thornhill is in the hospital. Bennett continued, satisfaction evident in his tone. With a bullet in his shoulder and a story about his bride-to-be trying to murder him after he caught her snooping through his private papers. Ethan's expression remained impassive, but Clara felt him stiffen beside her. Is Thornhill pressing charges? He asked evenly. Bennett's smile widened. Oh yes, for attempted murder, arson, and theft of private property. He reached into his coat, producing an official-looking document. I have a warrant for Miss Harrington's arrest. Step aside, Blackwood. Clara's legs threatened to give way. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't remember enough to defend herself, couldn't remember if she was guilty or innocent. Then Ethan did something unexpected. He laughed, a short, harsh sound devoid of humor. Your jurisdiction ends at my property line, Bennett. You know that. He crossed his arms. Miss Harrington is my guest, and she's injured. Doc Sullivan needs to examine her before she goes anywhere. Bennett's face darkened. Don't play games, Blackwood. This woman is dangerous. So you say. Ethan didn't budge. But I found her half dead in the snow. Seems to me she's the victim here. You're interfering with an investigation. I'm ensuring due process, Ethan interrupted. Doc Sullivan first. Then Miss Harrington can speak with you with legal representation present. The standoff stretched, tension crackling between the men. Finally, Bennett tucked the warrant back into his coat. Fine. Doc Sullivan's back tomorrow. I'll return with him. His gaze shifted to Clara. Don't get comfortable, Miss Harrington. And don't think about running again. There's nowhere in this county you can hide now. With that ominous warning, the sheriff and his deputies mounted their horses and rode back toward town. As they disappeared down the snowy drive, Clara's legs finally gave out. Ethan caught her arm, steadying her. Why did you do that? She whispered. Why protect me when you've just learned I might be? Might be, Ethan emphasized. I've had enough experience with Bennett and his rush to judgment. His jaw tightened. Besides, I've seen your wounds. Whatever happened that night, you didn't escape unscathed. Clara stared at him, realizing that beneath his gruff exterior beat the heart of a deeply principled man. Come inside, Miguel urged, glancing nervously down the road. We must prepare. In the kitchen, Clara sank into a chair, her mind racing. I need to remember, she murmured. I need to know what really happened. Ethan pulled up a chair across from her, his expression grave. Start with what you do remember. Even fragments might help. Clara closed her eyes, concentrating on the elusive shards of memory. A wedding, guests in formal attire. I was nervous. No, not nervous, determined. She frowned. I remember sneaking away during the reception, looking for something in an office. Thornhill's private papers, Ethan supplied, according to Bennett. Clara nodded slowly. Yes, documents. I found something important, something that made me. She broke off, pain lancing through her head. Then it's all confusion, shouting, fire, the gun. Her eyes flew open. I didn't want to marry him. That much I'm certain of. Miguel had been listening intently. Now he placed a cup of tea before Clara. Drink. It will help calm your nerves. Yeah. As Clara sipped the fragrant tea, Ethan rose and moved to the window, staring out at the darkening landscape. I need to tell you something about Jackson Thornhill, he said without turning. Something that might explain why you were looking through his papers. Clara waited, sensing they were approaching a critical juncture. 4 years ago, my wife Rebecca died in a fire. Ethan continued, his voice controlled and even. It started in our grain storage at night, spread quickly. She was trapped inside. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. The town decided I was responsible. Now Ethan turned, his eyes dark with old pain. No evidence, no trial, just whispers and assumptions. Convenient for everyone, especially Thornhill, who had been trying to buy our water rights for years. You think Thornhill, Clara began. I think Rebecca was investigating him, Ethan interrupted. She was persistent that way, always fighting for what she believed was right. Something in the way he spoke of his late wife resonated deeply with Clara. Another fragment of memory surfaced, a newspaper article about environmental activism, a woman's determined face in a black and white photograph. Did Rebecca have dark hair? Clara asked suddenly. Dark hair and light eyes. Was she an environmentalist? Ethan stared at her, genuine surprise breaking through his stoic facade. How could you know that? Clara pressed her fingertips to her temples, chasing the memory. I've seen her picture. In a newspaper, I think. She was protesting something Thornhill was doing. Ethan and Miguel exchanged a significant look. Rebecca led a campaign against Thornhill's water diversion project, Ethan said slowly. It was in all the regional papers about 5 years ago. That's the connection, Clara whispered. That's why I was at Thornhill's. I was looking for something related to Rebecca's work. But why? Miguel asked gently. Why now? Before Clara could attempt to answer, the sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. Ethan moved with surprising speed, pushing Clara down as a flaming bottle crashed through the kitchen window. Get down, he shouted, pulling her toward the door as flames erupted across the wooden countertop. Miguel was already moving, grabbing a bucket of water kept near the stove. Go! I will handle this. Ethan hesitated only a moment before dragging Clara through the house toward the back door. Outside, the winter night was alive with shadows moving across the snow. Bennett's men, Clara gasped as Ethan pulled her toward the barn. Not likely, Ethan replied grimly. Sheriff wouldn't resort to firebombs. This is someone who doesn't want you talking to authorities at all. The implications sent ice through Clara's veins. Whoever was attacking Shadow Creek wanted her silenced permanently. In the barn, Ethan quickly saddled Midnight, then thrust the reins into Clara's hands. Take the north trail through the woods. There's a cabin about 3 miles, an old hunting lodge. Stay there. What about you? Clara protested. I'll cover your escape, then follow. He pressed something cold and heavy into her palm, her revolver. Do you remember how to use this? Clara's fingers closed around the gun with disturbing familiarity. Yes. Ethan nodded, his face half illuminated by the distant flames now visible from the kitchen. Go, now. Clara mounted Midnight, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. Once before, she had fled on horseback into the night, but this time she wasn't alone. As she urged the horse toward the tree line, Clara glanced back at Shadow Creek. Ethan stood silhouetted against the fire-lit snow rifle raised toward the approaching shadows. Behind him, the ranch house where he had lost his wife now faced a second threat of flames. Because of her, the knowledge weighed heavy as Midnight carried her into the darkness of the forest. Clara Harrington might not remember exactly who she was, but she was beginning to understand what she had done. She had uncovered a dangerous secret, and that secret had followed her straight to Ethan Blackwood's door. The hunting cabin was a shadow against deeper shadows when Clara finally found it. Midnight had navigated the forest trail with surprising confidence, as if the horse remembered the way to this hidden refuge. Now, as Clara dismounted on stiff legs, the gelding's breath formed ghostly clouds in the moonlight. Good boy, she whispered, leading him to a small lean-to attached to the cabin. Her fingers were numb with cold as she fumbled with the cabin door, finally pushing it open to reveal absolute darkness within. Clara hesitated on the threshold. The darkness felt alive, somehow filled with secrets and forgotten memories. She drew the revolver from her pocket, its weight strangely comforting. Hello, she called softly, though she expected no answer. Silence greeted her. Clara stepped inside, blinking as her eyes adjusted. Moonlight filtered through a small window, revealing a simple one-room structure. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow bed the other. Dust covered every surface, undisturbed for what appeared to be months, perhaps years. Moving cautiously, Clara found matches on the mantel and lit a kerosene lamp. The warm glow chased shadows into corners, but couldn't dispel the sense of being watched. She shivered, turning slowly to examine her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was sparse, but had clearly been used recently enough to contain basic necessities. Firewood was stacked neatly beside the hearth. Canned goods lined a small shelf. A trunk at the foot of the bed held blankets that smelled of cedar and thyme. Clara busied herself making a fire, grateful for the muscle memory that guided her hands. As warmth slowly filled the cabin, she sank onto the edge of the bed, allowing exhaustion to claim her. Had Ethan made it out safely? The image of him silhouetted against the burning farmhouse haunted her. Why had he protected her? What did he see in her that made him risk everything when they'd only just met? Clara's gaze drifted to the small table beside the bed. A book lay there, its leather cover worn with handling. She picked it up, surprised to find it was a journal rather than a novel. Opening to a random page, she recognized the handwriting immediately, the same elegant script from the note in her wedding dress pocket. February 12th. The water samples confirmed contamination extending at least 2 miles downstream from Thornhill's new development. If the county commissioners won't act on this evidence, I'll take it to the state environmental office. JT can't be allowed to poison an entire ecosystem for profit. Clara's heart raced as she flipped to the beginning of the journal. The inscription made her breath catch, property of Rebecca Blackwood. If found, please return to Shadow Creek Ranch. This had been Rebecca's secret cabin, her refuge, and somehow Clara had known exactly where to find it. With trembling hands, Clara began reading from the beginning, hungry for answers. Each page revealed a woman of passion and conviction. Rebecca had been systematically documenting environmental violations by Thornhill Enterprises, building a case that threatened the powerful rancher's expansion plans. The entries grew more urgent as the journal progressed. April 3rd. Someone broke into my car today while I was collecting water samples. Nothing taken, but my papers were disturbed. A warning, perhaps Ethan wants me to go to the sheriff, but Bennett's in Thornhill's pocket. I need hard evidence that can't be ignored. April 17th, met with CH today. She's agreed to help with the investigation. Her position at the newspaper gives her access that I don't have. We must be careful, though. Thornhill has eyes everywhere. Clara stared at the initials. CH Clara Harrington. She flipped forward frantically, finding the last entry dated just days before Rebecca's death. May 2nd, we found it. The missing link connecting Thornhill to the Swift Creek fire 5 years ago. The same chemical accelerant. The same cover-up. The same convenient acquisition of distressed property afterward. CH is preparing the expose, but we need one final piece of evidence from Thornhill's private records. If we succeed, we'll finally have justice for those families, and Thornhill will face ruin. The meeting with our inside source is set for Friday. After that, there will be no turning back. The journal ended there. Rebecca had died before writing another entry. Clara closed the book, her mind reeling. The Swift Creek fire. Something about those words sent a jolt of recognition through her. A childhood memory surfaced, flames consuming a small community, screams in the night, her parents. The sound of approaching hoofbeats jerked Clara back to the present. She quickly extinguished the lamp and moved to the window, revolver ready. Relief washed through her as she recognized Ethan's bulky form dismounting from a horse that wasn't midnight. She opened the door before he could knock, the journal clutched to her chest. "You're safe," she breathed. Ethan's face was streaked with soot, his expression grim. For now, they torched the kitchen, but Miguel and I contained it. His eyes fixed on the book and her hands widening slightly. "Where did you find that?" "It was here, waiting." Clara stepped back, allowing him inside. I think I've been here before." Odd, Ethan moved past her, his large frame making the cabin seem smaller. He stared at the journal, an unreadable emotion crossing his features. "This was Rebecca's place," he said quietly. "Her sanctuary. I haven't been here since—" He broke off, removing his snow-dusted coat. "Since she died," Clara finished, "in a fire that wasn't an accident." Ethan's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What do you remember?" "Not remember," Clara corrected, holding out the journal. "Read." She watched as Ethan sank into the cabin's single chair, opening the journal with reverent hands. His expression transformed as he read, grief giving way to shock, then hardening into something like rage. "She never told me," he whispered, "about any of this." "She was protecting you," Clara said, the certainty coming from somewhere deep within her. "The less you knew, the safer you were." Ethan looked up, studying her with new intensity. "You worked with her. You're CH." "Oh," Clara nodded slowly. "I think so. I'm a journalist, or was. The memories are coming back in pieces." "What else?" he demanded. "What else do you remember?" Clara closed her eyes, concentrating on the fragments that had been shaken loose by Rebecca's journal. The Swift Creek fire. I was a child when it happened. My family lived there, one of the families who lost everything. Understanding dawned on Ethan's face. "That's why you were investigating Thornhill. It was personal." "Yes." Another memory surfaced, a newspaper office, a desk covered with documents, a byline, Clara Harrington, investigative reporter. "I work for the Valley Chronicle. Rebecca contacted me last year after finding similarities between the Swift Creek fire and other suspicious blazes that preceded Thornhill land acquisitions. Ethan stood abruptly pacing the small cabin. And what about the wedding? Why were you marrying the man you were investigating? Clara flinched as a particularly painful memory broke through. I wasn't, not really. She sank onto the bed as the truth crystallized. It was an undercover assignment, a way to access documents we couldn't get otherwise. The plan was to get into Thornhill's study during the wedding reception. Confusion. Jesus. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. You put yourself in the lion's den. It almost worked, Clara said softly. I found what we needed proof that Thornhill had orchestrated multiple arson incidents to acquire land cheaply, including Swift Creek. But he caught me. The final pieces clicked into place. Thornhill's rage, the struggle, the gun she'd grabbed from his desk drawer, the shot fired in self-defense. The curtains catching fire from overturned candles as she fled. I never meant to shoot him, she whispered, or start a fire. I just wanted justice for my family, for the other victims, for Rebecca. Ethan was silent for a long moment, absorbing everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. Bennett said you stole documents. Do you still have them? Clara frowned, another memory surfacing. I hid them during my escape. She concentrated, visualizing her panicked flight. There's a hollow tree just inside Shadow Creek's northern boundary. That's why I was on your property when you found me. I was coming back for them. Dawn was breaking when they finished talking, gray light seeping through the cabin windows. They had pieced together most of the story: Rebecca's investigation, her alliance with Clara, her murder disguised as an accident when she got too close to the truth. Clara had continued the work, eventually going undercover as Jackson Thornhill's fiancée, a role made possible by her distant family connection to local society and Thornhill's vanity. The wedding night disaster had left her concussed and disoriented, her memories scattered by trauma. Now those memories were returning, bringing with them danger and responsibility in equal measure. What happens next? Clara asked, watching Ethan stoke the dying fire. We retrieve those documents, he replied without hesitation. Then we get them to someone who can actually do something about Thornhill. Not Bennett. No. There's a state prosecutor in Helena who worked with Rebecca on environmental cases. Someone we can trust. Ethan turned to face her fully. But you need to be sure, Clara. Once we move against Thornhill with this evidence, there's no going back. He'll come at us with everything he has. Clara met his gaze steadily. I've been fighting this battle for 15 years, even when I didn't remember it. I'm not stopping now. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, respect perhaps, or recognition of a spirit akin to his late wife's. He nodded once decisively. We'll rest for a few hours, then head back to Shadow Creek under cover of darkness. Team. Miguel was waiting for them at the barn, his weathered face tight with concern. Sheriff Bennett returned, he said in a low voice as they dismounted. With Thornhill. Ethan cursed under his breath. Did they search the property? They tried. I told them you had gone for the doctor, taking Miss Harrington with you. Miguel's eyes twinkled briefly. They did not think to check the North Woods. Thornhill does not know the land as we do. Clara glanced nervously toward the main house. The kitchen window had been boarded up, but otherwise Shadow Creek looked peaceful in the pre-dawn light. Hard to believe it had become the center of a dangerous conspiracy. We need to find something, she told Miguel, quickly explaining about the hidden documents. The old ranch hand nodded thoughtfully. The hollow oak near the boundary stone, I know it. You do? Ethan looked surprised. Miguel's expression softened with old grief. Senora Rebecca used it sometimes to leave messages when she was working late. She thought I didn't know, but he shrugged. I worried about her alone out there. Ethan absorbed this new information about his wife with a complex emotion Clara couldn't quite name. Sorrow mixed with pride, perhaps, and regret for how much of Rebecca's life had remained hidden from him. Can you keep watch while we retrieve the documents? He asked Miguel. See, but hurry. Bennett has patrols on the main roads now, looking for both of you. The eastern sky was lightening as Clara and Ethan made their way through the snow-laden forest. Susan. Clara rode midnight again, finding comfort in the horse's steady presence. Her head ached with the strain of recovered memories, each new recollection bringing both clarity and fresh pain. There, she said, finally pointing to a massive oak that stood like a sentinel near a lichen-covered stone marker. That's it. They dismounted, approaching the ancient tree with reverence. Its massive trunk was scarred by lightning, creating a natural hollow large enough for a small woman to conceal herself in or to hide documents that could bring down a powerful man. Clara reached into the hollow, feeling around until her fingers closed on something wrapped in oilcloth. She withdrew the package, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a manila envelope sealed with tape. "This is it," she whispered, hands trembling slightly as she handed it to Ethan. He hesitated before opening it, eyes meeting hers. "Whatever's in here got Rebecca killed." "I know." Clara's voice was steady despite her fear. "That's why we have to make it count." Ethan broke the seal, spreading the contents across Midnight's saddle. Financial records, photographs, chemical analysis reports, and handwritten notes all told the same damning story. Jackson Thornhill had systematically used arson to devalue and then acquire properties across 3 counties over 15 years. The Swift Creek fire that had claimed Clara's childhood home and killed 3 residents was only one in a pattern of destruction. Most devastating were copies of insurance payouts, showing Thornhill had profited even from the fires themselves through fraudulent claims. "This is enough to put him away all for decades," Ethan said grimly, carefully repacking the evidence. A twig snapped in the forest behind them. Both froze, turning slowly toward the sound. Jackson Thornhill stood 20 feet away, rifle aimed at Ethan's chest. His right arm was in a sling, evidence of Clara's desperate shot, but his left was steady on the trigger. Sheriff Bennett and 2 deputies flanked him, their expressions grim. "I'll take those papers now," Thornhill said pleasantly, as if requesting the salt at dinner. Despite the early hour, he was immaculately dressed in a tailored coat and Stetson, looking every inch the wealthy rancher. Only his eyes revealed the predator beneath, cold and calculating. Clara stepped forward, instinctively placing herself between Ethan and the rifle. "It's over, Jackson. We have everything." "Clara, my dear." Thornhill's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Or should I call you Ms. Harrington, investigative reporter? Your dedication to your craft is admirable, if misguided." "You murdered my parents," Clara said, her voice shaking with 15 years of suppressed rage. "You murdered Rebecca Blackwood. How many others?" "Business casualties," Thornhill replied with a dismissive wave of his good hand. "Progress requires sacrifice. Most people understand that." Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. "You set that fire knowing my wife was in the barn." "She was becoming problematic." Thornhill's tone remained conversational. "Stirring up trouble with her environmental crusades, poking into matters that didn't concern her." His cold gaze shifted to Clara, rather like her young protege here. "You have a type, Blackwood." Clara felt Ethan tense beside her, ready to lunge, despite the rifles trained on them. She caught his arm, squeezing it in warning. "Sheriff," she appealed to Bennett, "you've sworn to uphold the law. The evidence is right here, multiple counts of arson, fraud, murder." "Alleged evidence," Bennett interrupted, not meeting her eyes. "Mr. Thornhill has explained that these documents were falsified as part of your vendetta against him." "You know that's not true," Ethan challenged. Bennett shrugged uncomfortably. "What I know is that he's the county's largest taxpayer and employer. What I know is that the word of a man like Jackson Thornhill carries more weight than a drifter like you, Blackwood, or some reporter with a grudge." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter morning. This was why Rebecca had never gone to the authorities. The system itself was corrupted. "The papers," Thornhill repeated, gesturing with the rifle. "Now." Time seemed to slow as Clara assessed their options. The evidence was too important to surrender. Too many lives had been lost, including Rebecca's, to give up now. A movement in the trees behind Thornhill caught her eye. Miguel circling silently through the underbrush with his own rifle. Their eyes met briefly, an understanding passing between them. "The documents are copies," Clara said loudly, buying time. "The originals are already on their way to the state prosecutor's office in Helena." Thornhill's composure slipped for the first time, uncertainty flickering across his features. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Clara took a deliberate step forward. "Rebecca was thorough. She made multiple copies, dead drops, insurance policies in case anything happened to her." Another step. "Did you really think we wouldn't have contingency plans dealing with someone like you?" Bennett looked nervously at his boss. "Mr. Thornhill, perhaps we should—" "Shut up." Thornhill snapped, his refined facade cracking. "She's lying. The documents were in her dress when she fled the wedding. My men searched everywhere else." "Not everywhere," Ethan said quietly, understanding Clara's strategy. Rebecca had friends you never knew about, connections you couldn't trace. Miguel was in position now, his rifle trained on Bennett. One shot would create enough chaos for them to act. Clara locked eyes with Thornhill, letting all her hatred show. You took everything from me. My home, my parents, years of my life spent searching for the truth. She took another step toward him. But Rebecca found it first, didn't she? That's why you killed her. She was interfering with progress. Thornhill's voice had lost its smoothness, revealing the ruthlessness beneath. Just like you. Just like everyone who stands in the way of the future I'm building. A future built on ashes and bones, Clara retorted. It ends today. She gave an imperceptible nod. Miguel's rifle cracked the shot, sending Bennett's hat flying. In the split second of confusion, Ethan launched himself at Thornhill, while Clara dove for cover behind the massive oak. Gunfire erupted, bullets splintering bark inches from Clara's head. She scrambled around the tree trunk, drawing her revolver. Ethan and Thornhill were grappling in the snow, the rifle forgotten as they fought with desperate intensity. Bennett and his deputies were pinned down by Miguel's expert shots, unable to assist their patron. Clara aimed her revolver, waiting for a clear shot at Thornhill, but the men were moving too quickly. With a roar of effort, Thornhill threw Ethan off, reaching for a knife concealed in his boot. The blade flashed in the early morning light as he lunged. Clara fired without hesitation. The bullet caught Thornhill in the shoulder, his good one spinning him backward into the snow. His eyes found hers, wide with shock and outrage. You shot me, he said, sounding more offended than pained. Again. Be grateful I didn't aim for your heart, Clara replied, keeping the revolver steady, though God knows you deserve it. Ethan recovered quickly, retrieving Thornhill's fallen rifle and training it on Bennett and his men. Weapons down, he ordered. Now. To Clara's surprise, the deputies complied immediately, looking almost relieved. Bennett hesitated longer, but eventually placed his pistol in the snow. You're making a mistake, he told Ethan. Thornhill will own this county long after today's drama is forgotten. Not from prison, he won't, Ethan replied evenly. Miguel emerged from the trees, his rifle never wavering from Bennett as he collected the surrendered weapons. Tie them, he told Ethan, producing rope from his saddlebag. Clara kept her revolver on Thornhill as Ethan secured the men. The rancher's aristocratic features were contorted with fury and disbelief, unable to comprehend that his carefully constructed empire was crumbling. You'll regret this, he hissed at Clara. All of you. I've regretted not finding the truth sooner, she replied quietly. I've regretted every day my parents didn't get justice. I've regretted not being able to save Rebecca. She knelt beside him, her voice dropping so only he could hear. But I will never regret watching you pay for what you've done. With the men secured, Miguel volunteered to guard them while Ethan and Clara rode for assistance. They could trust a federal marshal, who was an old friend of Ethan's father, stationed in the next county. As they mounted their horses, documents safely stowed in Ethan's saddlebag, Clara felt a strange lightness. The burden of unremembered tragedy of justice deferred was lifting at last. It's really over, she said wonderingly as they rode away from the hollow oak. After all these years. Ethan's expression remained guarded. The evidence is strong, but Thornhill has resources, connections. It won't be a simple case. Nothing worth fighting for ever is, Clara replied. The memories that had returned brought pain, but also purpose. She knew who she was now, what she had lost and what she might yet find. Their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They had both lost too much to Thornhill's ambition. Both lived with ghosts that could never be fully exorcised, but in each other perhaps they had found something unexpected, a second chance. As Shadow Creek fell behind them, Clara felt Rebecca's presence like a gentle current, guiding them toward justice, and perhaps eventually toward peace. The state prosecutor's office in Helena was housed in an imposing granite building that had witnessed nearly a century of Montana justice. Clara stood on the steps watching snow drift down from a pearl gray sky, wondering how different her life might have been if she had come here years earlier. Beside her, Ethan waited in patient silence. 3 days had passed since their confrontation with Thornhill. 3 days of statements and evidence reviews, of hotel rooms and careful vigilance. Thornhill remained in custody, his influence diminished but not destroyed. You're thinking about Rebecca, Clara said softly, not looking at Ethan. He didn't deny it. She should be here. This was her fight too. She is here. Clara touched the small journal in her pocket. Rebecca's journal, now evidence in the case against Jackson Thornhill. Everything we've done, every piece of evidence we've presented, she made it possible. Ethan nodded, his profile strong against the winter light. The days since their confrontation with Thornhill had changed him subtly. The burden of suspicion of being the town pariah had lifted. In its place was a quiet determination to see justice done for Rebecca, for Clara's parents, for all of Thornhill's victims. "What will you do after?" he asked, breaking their companionable silence. When this is over, Clara had been asking herself the same question. Her apartment in the city seemed a lifetime away. Her career at the newspaper, would they welcome her back after her unauthorized undercover operation? Did she even want that life anymore? "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything's changed." The door behind them opened, revealing Assistant State Prosecutor Diana Wilkes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had listened to their story with intense focus. "Ms. Harrington, Mr. Blackwood," she greeted them. "We're ready for you now." Inside, a conference room had been prepared for their final statements. Clara felt a flutter of nerves as she took her seat. The outcome of this meeting would determine whether Jackson Thornhill faced prosecution for his crimes. "I've reviewed all the evidence," Wilkes began without preamble. "The financial records, the chemical analyses, the insurance fraud documentation. It's compelling." Clara and Ethan exchanged cautious glances. "However," Wilkes continued, "Thornhill's attorneys are already arguing that the documents were obtained illegally during your unconventional undercover operation, Ms. Harrington. They're moving to have everything suppressed." "That's ridiculous," Ethan protested. "These are copies of Thornhill's own records proving his involvement in multiple arson cases, including my wife's murder." Wilkes held up a placating hand. "I agree, but courts have rules about evidence collection. Without something that was obtained through proper channels, we're vulnerable to legal challenges." Clara felt cold dread settling in her stomach. Had all their efforts, all the risks, been for nothing? "There might be another way," a new voice interjected from the doorway. Clara turned, shocked, to see Miguel standing there, accompanied by Sheriff Bennett. The sheriff looked distinctly uncomfortable, his usual swagger replaced by a hangdog expression. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, immediately suspicious. Miguel smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Sheriff Bennett has had, how do you say, a crisis of conscience." Bennett cleared his throat, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "Thornhill's been operating unchecked for too long, using all of us to cover his tracks." He placed a thick folder on the conference table. "These are copies of police reports from the past 15 years. Suspicious fires, witness statements that disappeared from official records, evidence that was misplaced in cases involving Thornhill properties." Wilkes opened the folder, eyebrows rising as she scanned the contents. "This is extremely helpful, Sheriff. Obtained through completely legal channels, I assume." Bennett nodded grimly. "All official county records, ma'am. I've been keeping my own copies. Insurance, you might say." "Against what?" Clara asked. "Against the day Thornhill decided I was expendable." Bennett finally met her eyes. "Like your parents, like Rebecca Blackwood." Clara understood then. Bennett hadn't been merely corrupt, he'd been terrified. Trapped in Thornhill's web and too cowardly to break free until now. "Why the change of heart?" Ethan asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "Because of her," Bennett nodded toward Clara. "What she said in the woods, about how Thornhill took everything from her, got me thinking about everything he's taken from this county, from all of us." He straightened his shoulders. "I've been a lawman for 30 years. Time I started acting like one again." Wilkes was already reviewing the new evidence, her expression brightening. "This changes everything. With official police records corroborating your documentation, we have a much stronger case." Miguel moved to stand beside Ethan, his voice low. "It seems even the most unlikely souls can find redemption." "No?" Ethan's response was interrupted by the conference room phone ringing. Wilkes answered, her expression darkening as she listened. When she hung up, her eyes were troubled. "There's been a development," she informed them. Jackson Thornhill was being transferred to the county courthouse for arraignment. His transport was ambushed 10 minutes ago. He's escaped custody. The words fell like stones in still water ripples of implications spreading outward. Thornhill was free, and he knew exactly who was responsible for his downfall. "Shadow Creek," Ethan said, immediately rising to his feet. "He'll go there first." Clara felt it too, the certainty that Thornhill would seek vengeance at the place where his schemes had finally unraveled. "I've already ordered a full response team," Wilkes assured them, "but it will take time to mobilize." "We don't have time," Clara insisted, already moving toward the door. "Shadow Creek is 3 hours from here. If Thornhill's men broke him out, they'll have transportation ready." Bennett stepped forward, keys in hand. "My cruiser's downstairs. I'll drive." Ethan hesitated, clearly weighing the sheriff's trustworthiness. "Let him help," Miguel said quietly. "Even a man who loses his way can find it again with the right map." Outside, the snow was falling heavier, a winter storm moving in from the mountains. As they hurried toward Bennett's cruiser, Clara caught Ethan's arm. "If Thornhill reaches Shadow Creek before us," she began. "He won't." Ethan's voice held absolute conviction. "He's taken enough from both of us. No more." Their eyes met in perfect understanding. Whatever awaited them at Shadow Creek, they would face it together, bound by a shared past of loss and a present moment of determination. As Bennett's cruiser pulled away from the courthouse, Clara felt Rebecca's journal in her pocket, a talisman connecting past and present. The final chapter of their story was about to be written not in words on paper, but in actions that would determine whether justice or vengeance would prevail. Shadow Creek was calling them home, for the reckoning that had been 15 years in the making. The storm intensified as Bennett's cruiser raced toward Shadow Creek. Snow blanketed the highway, reducing visibility to mere yards ahead. In the passenger seat, Ethan leaned forward as if he could will them to move faster through sheer determination. Clara sat behind him, Rebecca's journal open in her lap, though she'd long since stopped reading. "We should have heard something by now," Bennett muttered, eyes fixed on the treacherous road. He'd been trying to raise his deputies on the radio for the past hour without success. "Thornhill would have disabled communications first," Clara said quietly. "It's what I would do." Miguel, seated beside her, grunted in agreement. "The man thinks like a general, always 3 steps ahead." "Not always." Ethan's voice was steel wrapped in ice. He didn't anticipate Rebecca's contingency plans, or Clara surviving, or us finding the evidence. "One mistake in 15 years, Bennett replied grimly. "That's a hell of a record." Clara closed the journal, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover. Reading Rebecca's words had filled in the remaining gaps in her memory. The brilliant, passionate woman who had reached out to a young reporter obsessed with solving the mystery of the Swift Creek fire. Their cautious alliance that blossomed into friendship. The meticulous investigation they'd built together. And the final plan, Clara going undercover by leveraging distant family connections to infiltrate Thornhill's inner circle that had cost Rebecca her life when Thornhill discovered he was being investigated. "We're 20 minutes out," Bennett announced, squinting through the windshield at a road sign nearly obscured by snow, "assuming the bridge at Miller's Creek is still passable." Ethan tensed. "If it's not, then we're an hour out, taking the long way around the canyon." Clara exchanged a worried glance with Miguel. An hour could mean the difference between stopping Thornhill and finding Shadow Creek reduced to ashes, Thornhill's signature form of retribution. The cruiser fishtailed slightly on the slick road. Bennett corrected with practiced ease, but the close call highlighted their precarious situation. Nature itself seemed determined to delay them. "There's a call coming in," Bennett said, suddenly adjusting the radio. "County dispatch." Static crackled. Then a voice emerged. "Repeat all units. Fire reported at Shadow Creek Ranch. No emergency services available due to road conditions. Any units in vicinity, please respond." The words fell like hammer blows. Too late. They were too late. "How far to the cutoff road?" Ethan demanded. "Half-mile Bohayo." Bennett replied, accelerating despite the dangerous conditions. "But if the main house is already burning, just get us there." The cruiser skidded around a bend, revealing flashing lights ahead. A highway patrol car was parked sideways across the road, an officer waving them down. "Damn it," Bennett swore, slowing reluctantly. The trooper approached, shouting over the wind, "Roads closed ahead. Bridges flooded from the snow melt." Bennett flashed his badge. "Sheriff's business." "We're responding to a fire at Shadow Creek." The trooper shook his head. "No way through, Sheriff. Bridge has 6 inches of water running over it. You'd be swept downstream before you made it halfway across." Clara felt despair rising like floodwater. So close, yet impossibly far. "The old logging road," Miguel said suddenly. "It crosses the creek above the falls, narrower but higher ground." That road's been closed for years, Bennett objected. Probably washed out in places. It's our only chance, Ethan insisted. How far back is the turnoff? 3 miles, Miguel answered. I can guide you. Bennett hesitated only briefly before spinning the cruiser around. Clara caught a glimpse of the trooper's startled face as they accelerated back the way they'd come. The logging road was little more than a trail barely visible beneath the fresh snow. Bennett cursed steadily as the cruiser bounced and slid along the treacherous path, branches scraping against the windows like desperate fingers. There, Miguel pointed ahead where the narrow road crossed a rushing creek. The makeshift bridge was alarmingly primitive logs lashed together across stone supports, but it stood above the swollen waters. That doesn't look safe, Bennett muttered. It's not, Ethan replied, but neither is Thornhill. The cruiser inched across the bridge wood, creaking ominously beneath them. Clara held her breath until they reached the other side, the vehicle lurching back onto relatively solid ground. 2 miles to Shadow Creek, Miguel announced. We approach from the east behind the old orchard. As they crested a small rise, Clara gasped. The night sky ahead glowed orange, the unmistakable signature of a large fire. No, she whispered, reaching instinctively for Ethan's shoulder. His hand covered hers, briefly warm and steady despite everything. We're not too late, he said with quiet certainty. Not this time. The cruiser could go no farther as the logging road deteriorated completely. They continued on foot, trudging through knee-deep snow, guided by the ominous glow ahead. As they approached Shadow Creek from the east, Clara realized it wasn't the main house burning. The barn, Ethan identified, his pace quickening. He's starting with the outbuildings. Like before, Clara said softly, with Rebecca. Ethan's expression hardened, but he didn't slow. They skirted the orchard using the ancient apple trees as cover. From their vantage point, they could see 3 vehicles parked near the burning barn, a black SUV, and 2 pickup trucks. Armed men patrolled the area between the burning structure and the main house. I count 5, Bennett whispered, binoculars raised, plus Thornhill. Clara followed his gaze. Jackson Thornhill stood near the porch steps, his tall figure unmistakable, even at a distance. He was gesturing toward the house, giving instructions to his men. His right arm remained in its sling, his injured shoulder a reminder of Clara's desperate act of self-defense. He's going to burn it all, Miguel said grimly. Everything. Not while I'm alive, Ethan replied, checking the rifle Bennett had provided from the cruiser's rack. They formulated a simple plan. Bennett and Miguel would circle around to approach from the north, creating a diversion that would allow Ethan and Clara to get closer to the house. The goal was to reach Thornhill himself. Without their leader, his hired men might lose their resolve. As Bennett and Miguel disappeared into the darkness, Clara turned to Ethan. Words seemed inadequate for what might be their final moments together, yet she felt compelled to try. Ethan, if this doesn't, it will, he interrupted, his eyes reflecting the distant flames. We'll stop him. For Rebecca, for your parents, for all of it. Clara nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. For the future, too. Something shifted in his expression. A softening, a recognition of possibilities beyond this night. Then Bennett's signal came, 2 short whistles cutting through the wind, and there was no more time for words. They moved through the orchard using the storm as cover. When gunfire erupted from the north side of the property, Thornhill's men reacted predictably, several rushing toward the disturbance. Now, Ethan whispered, and they ran crouched low toward the back of the main house. They reached the kitchen door unseen. Inside, Shadow Creek was dark and silent, showing no signs of Thornhill's intrusion. Clara followed Ethan through familiar rooms, memories of her recovery here just days ago, feeling like another lifetime. A crash from the front of the house froze them in place. Voices approached Thornhill and one of his men entering through the main door. Start with the study, Thornhill was saying, his cultured voice incongruous with his murderous intent. That's where Blackwood would keep anything important. Then work your way through methodically. I want nothing left but ashes. Clara and Ethan exchanged glances, silently retreating toward the back staircase. They needed to circle around to approach Thornhill from behind. As they moved through the darkened house, Clara felt an eerie sense of déjà vu. Another fire, another desperate escape, history repeating with cruel precision. Upstairs, they made their way toward the front of the house, following the sound of Thornhill's voice as he directed the systematic destruction of Ethan's home. The irony wasn't lost on Clara. Once again, she was hiding in the shadows, hunted by the same man who had orchestrated so much suffering. But this time was different. This time she wasn't alone, wasn't running in blind panic. This time she had truth and justice on her side and Ethan Blackwood beside her. They reached the top of the main staircase, just as Thornhill began to ascend, a kerosene lantern in his good hand. Ethan raised his rifle, but Clara placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Jackson," she called softly, stepping into view at the top of the stairs. Thornhill froze, his aristocratic features illuminated by the lantern's glow. For an instant, naked shock registered on his face before his composure returned. "Clara," he replied, his tone almost conversational. "I suspected you might find your way back here. Sentimental attachment to the scene of your rebirth, shall we say." "It's over," Clara said steadily. "Bennett has turned state's evidence. The prosecutor has everything: the financial records, the chemical analyses, the witness statements you tried to bury." Thornhill laughed, the sound echoing in the silent house. "Nothing is ever truly over, my dear. Not while I have resources, connections." His gaze shifted to Ethan, who had emerged from the shadows, rifle aimed at Thornhill's chest. "Ah, Mr. Blackwood, how convenient. I can finish what I started 4 years ago." "You murdered my wife," Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet. "Business," Thornhill corrected. "Nothing personal. She was interfering with necessary progress." "Is that what you told yourself about Swift Creek, too?" Clara demanded. "About all the other fires, that they were necessary for progress?" Something dark flickered across Thornhill's face. "The weak make way for the strong. It's the natural order of things." "Not this time," Ethan replied. Gunfire from outside punctuated his words. The diversion was becoming a genuine firefight. Thornhill smiled thinly. "My men outnumber your pitiful rescue party," he observed. "This ends only one way." "You're right about that," Clara agreed, taking a deliberate step down the staircase toward him. "But you're wrong about which way." Thornhill's composure slipped slightly, uncertainty entering his eyes as she approached. "Stay back." Clara continued her descent, each step measured and deliberate. "You've spent 15 years hiding behind wealth and intimidation, burning away obstacles, using others to do your dirty work." Another step. "But you're just a man, Jackson. A weak, cowardly man who couldn't build something legitimate, so you destroyed what others created instead." Thornhill's hand moved toward his coat, but Ethan's warning was immediate. "Don't." "You've lost," Clara continued, now just a few steps above him. "Everything you've built is crumbling. Your legacy will be prison walls and disgrace." "Never," Thornhill snarled, his refined veneer finally cracking completely. "I am this county. I made it what it is today." "You bled it dry," Clara corrected. "You built on suffering and death. My parents, Rebecca, all those families at Swift Creek." "Necessary sacrifices," Thornhill insisted, "for the greater vision. My vision." "A vision that dies tonight," Ethan said quietly. Something in his tone must have penetrated Thornhill's delusion. The rancher's eyes darted toward the windows, where flickering light revealed the barn now fully engulfed in flames. His men were no longer visible outside, either driven off by Bennett and Miguel or drawn into a confrontation away from the house. "It seems we're at an impasse," Thornhill observed, his composure returning through sheer force of will. "You can't kill me in cold blood, Blackwood. You're not that kind of man." His smile was razor thin. Rebecca knew that too. Her fatal flaw was believing in justice rather than power. Clara saw Ethan's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the rage and grief warring in his eyes. For a moment, she thought she might surrender to the vengeance that had sustained him through 4 years of isolation and suspicion. "Ethan," she said softly, "not like this." Their eyes met over Thornhill's head, a moment of perfect understanding. Ethan nodded almost imperceptibly, his finger easing on the trigger. That moment of distraction was all Thornhill needed. With surprising speed for an injured man, he hurled the kerosene lantern up the stairs. It shattered at Clara's feet, flames erupting instantly across the dry wooden steps. Clara leaped backward as fire raced up the staircase. Through the wall of flames, she saw Thornhill turn and flee toward the front door. "Go after him!" she shouted to Ethan, already searching for another way down. "I'll find another route." Ethan hesitated only a second before racing down the hall toward the back stairs, his expression promising reckoning for Thornhill's final act of destruction. Clara turned toward the guest room where she'd first awakened at Shadow Creek. The window there overlooked the sloping roof of the back porch, a possible escape route. As she ran, she could smell smoke following her, the fire spreading quickly through the old house. History repeating itself. Another Thornhill fire. Another desperate escape, but not another death. Not this time. In the guest room, Clara threw open the window, cold air rushing in to meet the advancing heat at her back. The roof below was slick with snow, but navigable. She climbed out carefully, finding purchase on the rough shingles. Below and around her, Shadow Creek was transforming into a nightmare landscape of fire and shadow. The barn was now a skeleton of glowing timbers. The main house had flames visible in multiple windows. In the distance, gunfire had ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the roar of the consuming fire. Clara made her way cautiously along the roof edge, searching for the safest point to drop to the ground. Movement near the tree line caught her eye, Thornhill running awkwardly through the snow toward the black SUV. Ethan was in pursuit, gaining ground rapidly. Clara watched as Ethan tackled Thornhill just short of the vehicle. The men went down in a spray of snow, struggling for dominance. Even injured Thornhill fought with the desperation of a cornered animal. Clara picked her way to the edge of the roof and dropped to a snowdrift below the soft powder cushioning her fall. She ran toward the struggling men, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. By the time she reached them, Ethan had subdued Thornhill, forcing him face down in the snow. The rancher's refined facade had shattered completely. He cursed and threatened, promises of retribution spilling from bloodied lips. "It's over, Jackson," Clara said, standing over him. "Really over." "Nothing's over," Thornhill spat, twisting to glare up at her. "You think this ends with me? The world runs on people like me, people who do what's necessary." "Murder isn't necessary," Ethan replied, securing Thornhill's wrists with his belt. "Destroying lives isn't necessary." "Fools," Thornhill hissed. "Both of you, just like Rebecca, idealists who don't understand how progress works." Clara knelt beside him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I understand exactly how it works. True progress comes from building up, not burning down. From creation, not destruction." She stood, turning away from him. "You never understood that. That's why you'll be forgotten while Rebecca's work lives on." The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Two county patrol cars appeared on the main road, followed by fire trucks laboring through the deep snow. Bennett must have reached a radio, called in reinforcements. As flashing lights illuminated the scene, Clara turned to look at Shadow Creek. The main house was fully involved now, flames reaching skyward as if in triumph. Everything Ethan had preserved of his life with Rebecca, all the memories, all the tangible connections, was being consumed before their eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, moving to stand beside him. "You're home." Ethan's expression was strangely peaceful as he watched the fire. "Just a house," he said quietly. "The memories don't burn." Clara followed his gaze, understanding dawning. Shadow Creek had become a mausoleum after Rebecca's death, a shrine to what was lost rather than a home for the living. Perhaps there was a kind of liberation in its destruction, a release from the physical reminders of grief. "We can rebuild," she said, the words emerging before she'd fully formed the thought. Ethan looked at her, then really looked at her, as if seeing a future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. "We..." Before Clara could respond, Miguel appeared from the darkness, Bennett at his side. Both men were soot-stained but unharmed. "Thornhill's men have fled or surrendered," Bennett reported, eyeing his former patron with undisguised contempt. "State police are on their way to take him into custody." "And the fire?" Ethan asked. Bennett shook his head. "They'll save what they can, but with the road conditions and water supply." The implication was clear. Shadow Creek Ranch would burn to its foundations tonight. Thornhill began to laugh, the sound brittle and unhinged. "You see, even in defeat I win. Everything you had, Blackwood. Everything you tried to preserve of her. Gone." Ethan regarded him with something like pity. "You still don't understand, do you? Rebecca wasn't in that house. She was in the work she did, the lives she touched, the truth she uncovered." He glanced at Clara, the connections she made. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, understanding the depth of what he was saying. Rebecca lived on in both of them, in Ethan's quiet strength, in Clara's determination to finish what they'd started together. No fire could destroy that legacy. Dawn broke over Shadow Creek, revealing the full extent of the night's destruction. The main house was gone, reduced to smoldering ruins. The barn was a blackened skeleton against the snow. Only the bunkhouse and a few smaller outbuildings had been saved by the firefighters' efforts. Clara stood at the edge of what had once been Rebecca's garden, now buried beneath snow and ash. The cold morning air stung her lungs, a reminder that she was alive, that they all were, despite Thornhill's final attempt to add them to his list of victims. Thornhill himself was gone, transported to a secure facility in Helena to await trial. Bennett had gone with him, determined to see his former associate face justice. Miguel moved quietly among the wreckage, salvaging what little could be saved. Clara heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Ethan approaching. He looked exhausted but oddly unburdened, as if the night's fire had consumed more than just timbers and furnishings. Miguel found something, he said, holding out a small metal box. In what's left of the study, the safe protected it. Clara recognized it immediately from Rebecca's journal entries, the fireproof container where she'd kept her most important research. With trembling fingers, Clara opened it to find documents, photographs, and a sealed letter addressed to Ethan in Rebecca's distinctive handwriting. "Have you?" She gestured to the letter. Ethan shook his head. "Not yet." Clara handed it to him, understanding that this moment needed privacy. "I'll help Miguel," she said, turning toward the bunkhouse. "Clara," Ethan's voice stopped her. "Wait." She turned back, watching as he carefully opened the letter. His expression changed as he read, grief and surprise giving way to something softer, almost peaceful. When he finished, he folded the pages carefully and looked up at her. "She knew," he said simply, "about the danger, about what might happen. This letter," he paused, collecting himself. "She wrote it the week before she died, said if anything happened to her, I should trust certain people who would continue her work." A faint smile touched his lips. She mentioned a persistent young reporter named Clara who understood what was at stake. Clara's breath caught. "She knew we'd find each other. She hoped we would." Ethan stepped closer, his voice lowering. "There's more. She wrote that if the worst happened, she didn't want me to turn Shadow Creek into a memorial. Said life was for the living." His eyes held Clara's. "She wanted me to rebuild, to start again." The weight of those words hung between them. Permission from the past to embrace a future neither had imagined possible. "What do you think?" Clara asked softly. Ethan gestured toward the ruins of the house. "I think Shadow Creek has seen enough shadows." His hand found hers, cold fingers intertwining. "Maybe it's time for light instead." The simple touch conveyed more than elaborate declarations, could have a connection forged through shared grief and purpose, now opening to new possibilities. "Rebuilding takes time," Clara said, giving voice to the uncertainty they both felt. "And patience." "I have both," Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "If you do." Before Clara could respond, Miguel approached, carrying a small terracotta pot with a single green shoot emerging from the soil. "From Rebecca's greenhouse," the old man explained, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Rose cutting, still alive despite everything." Clara accepted the pot, carefully recognizing the symbolism. Life persisting through fire and ice, renewal after devastation, a starting point small but resilient. "Where would you plant it?" she asked Ethan. He considered the question, looking out over the snow-covered expanse of Shadow Creek. "Somewhere it can grow without shadows, where it can be seen from wherever we rebuild." Clara repeated the word, no longer a question, but a statement. Ethan nodded, something like hope warming his eyes for the first time since Clara had known him. "We." Miguel diplomatically retreated, leaving them alone with a tiny rose cutting a tangible promise of what might yet grow from the ashes of their shared past. In the distance, the mountains stood unchanged by the night's drama, their silent presence a reminder that some things endured beyond human tragedy and triumph. Shadow Creek would rebuild. Justice would proceed through the courts. The truth Rebecca had died for would finally be known. And here in this moment, between past and future, Clara Harrington and Ethan Blackwood had found something neither had been looking for: a second chance. "I need to see this through," Clara said, thinking of the upcoming trial, the stories that remained to be written, the full accounting of Thornhill's crimes. "For Rebecca, for my parents, for all of it." "I know," Ethan replied. "So do I." His hand tightened around hers. "But after," Clara looked down at the tiny green shoot, Rebecca's final gift to them both. After we plant this rose somewhere without shadows. And see what grows, Ethan finished. Around them, Shadow Creek lay buried under snow and ash, an ending and a beginning written in the same hand. The shadows remained would always remain as part of their story, but now there was also the promise of light. Clara held the rose cutting closer, protecting it from the cold wind. Some legacies were meant to burn to be reduced to their essential truths. Others were meant to bloom to transform grief into something beautiful and new. As the morning sun crested the eastern mountains, Shadow Creek was illuminated in brilliant light, no longer a place of shadows but of possibilities yet to be written. Together they turned toward the future, carrying with them all that had been lost, all that had been found, and all that might yet grow in the spaces between.